In one of the residential neighborhoods of Manizales, on the 5th floor of a high-rise apartment building, a heartbreaking event unfolded that shook not only the local community, but also the entire country of Colombia. A 2-year-old girl named Antonella was found without signs of life, and her mother, 20-year-old Silvana Torres, quickly became the main person of interest in the case. The first media reports emerged almost immediately after the incident, sparking a wave of shock and disbelief. The event took place on the morning of July 26, 2025, around 11:40 a.m. Inside the apartment of the Torre Diaz complex, local authorities discovered the body of the little girl and her mother with a neck injury. The apartment door had been locked from the inside, an initial clue that became critical in the investigation. Neighbors reported hearing shouting, followed by sudden silence. When Antonella's grandmother, Silvana's mother, returned home, she couldn't get the door open. With the help of neighbors and emergency services, they forced entry and were met with a chilling scene: the lifeless body of the girl and her mother lying nearby in a serious condition. Emergency responders arrived quickly, but it was already too late for Antonella. Silvana Torres was rushed to a hospital under police supervision. While early reports circulated the possibility of a deliberate act, official authorities refrained from making statements until a full forensic examination was completed. The news spread rapidly across the country. Manizales, a city known for its quiet and peaceful lifestyle, suddenly became the focus of national media attention. Live coverage from outside the apartment complex began airing, and crowds gathered demanding answers and accountability. The public reacted strongly, and within hours, investigators found themselves under intense pressure. Details about Silvana Torres began to surface: a young woman living with her mother and daughter, working sporadically on different shifts. According to neighbors, she made efforts to care for her daughter, had no disputes with others in the building, and generally led a quiet life. Some people described her as a devoted mother, while others mentioned mood swings and tension within the family. Shortly before the incident, those close to her reported that Silvana had gone through a breakup with a former partner who had been helping raise Antonella. Witnesses described the relationship as unstable, though the man was still involved in the girl's life. Investigators later confirmed that on the day of the incident, Silvana was home alone. Her mother had gone out earlier for errands. Initial inspections confirmed the door had been locked from the inside, with no signs of forced entry, ruling out third-party involvement early on. Investigators documented the scene carefully: the positions of the bodies, household items, traces of blood, and the condition of the kitchen, which was believed to be the location of the event. Theories ranged from an impulsive act to a possible psychological breakdown. By the evening, the city was already caught in a storm of media coverage. Photos of the building appeared in news broadcasts, and groups of residents gathered below the windows. On social media, calls for justice grew louder, while others urged caution and patience until the facts were officially confirmed. This marked the beginning of what would become one of Colombia's most widely followed criminal cases in 2025. A case that combined everyday reality with devastating consequences and questions that the investigation was only beginning to explore. After the investigative team arrived, the 5th floor apartment was immediately secured. Forensic specialists documented the entire scene: the condition of the front door, the position of Antonella's body, and traces of blood on the kitchen floor and wall. Nearby, they found a knife with visible biological residue. Silvana Torres had surface wounds on her neck, consistent with an act of self-harm. She was in a state of shock and unable to give clear or consistent explanations. The Manizales patrol officers were the first to confirm there were no signs of forced entry. The windows were closed, the locks were intact, and the balcony showed no indication of intrusion. Neighbors stated they heard a brief cry from Antonella, followed by a loud noise, and then complete silence. These witness statements became a crucial part of the initial picture. The suspect's mother arrived home a few minutes later, but the door was locked from the inside. After several failed attempts to get in, she asked the neighbors for help and then contacted emergency services. During the examination of Antonella, experts documented multiple wounds to the neck area. The preliminary conclusion indicated that the cause of passing was blood loss. The position of the body suggested that Antonella had been in her mother's arms during the incident. Personal belongings, a phone, handwritten notes, leftover medication, and household items that could be relevant to the investigation were collected from the scene. Silvana Torres was transported to San Marcelo Hospital, where she received medical treatment. She remained under the supervision of both doctors and law enforcement. After her condition was stabilized, she was placed under investigative custody. Investigators immediately requested access to her medical records to determine whether she had any history of depression or a condition that could have influenced her actions. At the same time, a review of her social environment began. Family protection inspectors discovered that the household had previously been registered with local social services because Silvana had requested assistance due to financial difficulties. Reports indicated that there had been no complaints of aggressive behavior or threats toward Antonella. No prior police interventions at the home had been recorded. The next day, representatives from the Caldas Department Prosecutor's Office arrived in Manizales. An official investigation was opened under an article related to a crime against a minor. The case was transferred to the Family and Youth Division. Investigators examined the building entrance, stairwells, and security cameras. Footage showed Silvana returning home in the morning with Antonella in her arms, and from that moment until the door was forced open, no one entered or exited the apartment. This confirmed the theory that the incident took place in complete isolation. A crucial part of the investigation came from the forensic medical report. According to preliminary data, Antonella passed away shortly before emergency services were called. Traces of sedative medication were found in Silvana's blood. This led investigators to believe she may have taken the medicine before the injuries occurred. No signs of alcohol or prohibited substances were detected. Psychologists, assigned by the prosecutor's office, noted strong emotional distress in the suspect. According to hospital staff, in the first hours after the incident, she did not show aggression and appeared apathetic. Later, she told investigators that she didn't remember how it all happened. These statements were recorded in the official protocol but could not legally serve as a confession. At an early stage, investigators did not rule out the possibility of a deliberate act. However, they also considered a short-term psychological breakdown caused by extreme stress or emotional collapse. To confirm or disprove these possibilities, the prosecutor's office ordered a comprehensive psychiatric evaluation. While doctors continued to monitor the suspect, public attention to the case kept growing. Residents gathered outside the courthouse demanding accountability. Local media broadcast reports around the clock, creating an atmosphere of pressure on the investigative authorities. Society demanded explanations, but officials remained cautious, waiting for expert conclusions. By this point, the story was no longer just a local tragedy. It had become a symbol of public tension, an example of how a domestic crisis could escalate into a national conversation about motherhood, mental health, and the responsibility of the state. The news of 2-year-old Antonella's passing quickly spread beyond the city of Manizales. National TV networks included the story in their evening broadcasts, and photos of Silvana Torres and her daughter circulated widely across social media. Within just a few hours, the tragedy had become a nationwide topic. Reactions varied, from public outrage to attempts to understand what happened through the lens of Silvana's psychological state. Spontaneous memorials appeared in the neighborhood, with stuffed animals, flowers, and handwritten notes bearing Antonella's name placed outside the building where the tragedy occurred. Locals gathered there, lighting candles in silent tribute. Meanwhile, the investigation continued behind closed doors. The Caldas Department Prosecutor's Office issued a brief statement confirming that Silvana Torres had been taken into custody and that a criminal investigation was underway. The investigative team expanded its efforts, ordering additional forensic tests. Relatives, neighbors, and acquaintances of the family were questioned. Investigators paid particular attention to the mother's emotional state in the days leading up to the incident. One close friend told investigators that Silvana had recently expressed feeling overwhelmed and anxious. She reportedly talked about financial difficulties, a recent breakup, and a lack of support. These statements supported the theory of emotional exhaustion. Authorities requested her therapy history and details on any medications she had been prescribed. Medical records showed that Silvana had previously undergone short-term treatment for a depressive episode, but had not completed the full course of therapy. A psychological evaluation conducted several days after the event revealed symptoms of adjustment disorder and episodes of memory loss. Specialists didn't rule out the possibility of a brief loss of control over her actions. However, the prosecution emphasized that emotional instability did not exempt a person from criminal liability. This difference in assessment would become a central point in the upcoming trial. At the same time, unverified information began circulating online. Some accounts published alternative versions of events, none of which were confirmed by authorities, fueling panic and speculation. Family members publicly urged people to stop spreading rumors, but by then, the flow of misinformation was difficult to contain. Journalists camped outside the hospital where the suspect was staying, attempting to obtain comments from medical staff. The investigative team released a preliminary report. It stated there were no signs of third-party involvement in the apartment. Physical evidence pointed to direct involvement from the mother. Wounds found on Antonella's body were consistent with the knife recovered at the scene. Forensic experts concluded that the injuries had been inflicted with the same object, in rapid succession. This led investigators to suspect intent, though the motive remained unclear. A forensic lab later provided toxicology results confirming the presence of sedatives in Silvana's bloodstream. While the dosage was not lethal, it could have caused drowsiness and impaired judgment. Investigators recorded this as a potentially important factor in understanding her mental state at the time of the incident. An emergency meeting was held at Manizales City Hall to address the growing public concern. Representatives from Child Protection Services announced a review of monitoring protocols for at-risk families. Colombia's Ministry of Health publicly emphasized the need for better mental health support for mothers dealing with postpartum or high-stress conditions. The case of Silvana Torres came to symbolize a broader systemic issue, far beyond a single event. A few days later, Silvana was transferred from the hospital to a detention facility under heightened security. Her transport sparked public protests. Locals shouted accusations and demands for justice. Law enforcement increased their presence to prevent any vigilante actions. The incident underscored how quickly a deeply personal crisis had turned into widespread public condemnation. The investigation shifted into a new phase focused on motives and psychological factors. Prosecutors worked on drafting formal charges, while the defense pushed to recognize mental health issues as mitigating circumstances. Final conclusions were pending a comprehensive psychiatric evaluation, which would determine whether Silvana had full awareness of her actions at the time of her daughter's death. After the initial forensic examinations were completed, the Caldas Department Prosecutor's Office formally charged Silvana Torres with committing a serious offense that led to the passing of her young daughter. According to the investigation, her actions were deliberate and directly caused the tragic outcome. The charges were based on forensic evidence, medical findings, and a timeline of events documented in the case file. The court approved the prosecution's request for her to remain in custody throughout the ongoing investigation. Prosecutors classified the crime as aggravated, citing the close family relationship and the age of the victim. Investigators argued that Silvana had opportunities to prevent the tragedy, but instead acted with intention. The report stated that the knife used during the incident had been taken from the kitchen beforehand, which they interpreted as a sign of premeditation. No evidence of a struggle or resistance was found. The defense presented a different narrative. Silvana's attorney argued that she had been suffering from a severe emotional and psychological breakdown, triggered by chronic stress and depression. As evidence, they submitted medical records and psychiatric evaluations indicating signs of significant mental exhaustion. The defense claimed that Silvana had experienced a psychological crisis and was unable to fully understand the consequences of her actions. A second psychiatric assessment ordered by the prosecution concluded that Silvana did not suffer from a long-term mental illness but may have experienced a temporary psychological disturbance at the time of the event. This finding became a point of contention, as the legal definition of a brief loss of control remains ambiguous under national law. Prosecutors also examined possible personal motives. Messages and conversations retrieved from Silvana's phone revealed that she had been discussing the end of her relationship and the challenges of raising her daughter shortly before the incident. Some of these messages contained language interpreted by investigators as expressions of despair. Although these communications were added to the case, the defense insisted they lacked clear intent and were taken out of context. During pretrial hearings, the prosecution argued that despite her emotional condition, Silvana's actions involved physical effort and deliberate sequencing, suggesting a level of control. The defense countered, stating that such conclusions failed to account for the psychological chaos of a person in crisis, acting impulsively without full awareness. A debate arose over the possible reclassification of the charges. Silvana's lawyer requested that the case be considered an instance of unintentional harm, which would carry a lighter sentence. The prosecution firmly rejected the proposal, stressing the severity of the incident and its public impact. The court declined to modify the original charge, maintaining the classification of an aggravated offense. Public interest in the trial continued to grow. Every new document leaked to the press was analyzed across news broadcasts and social media platforms. Psychologists and legal experts offered commentary, often proposing conflicting theories. Public opinion was divided. Some were convinced of Silvana's guilt, while others saw her as a victim of systemic failure and lack of support. Silvana's mother, the grandmother of the deceased girl, officially confirmed her cooperation with investigators. Her testimony helped reconstruct the timeline on the morning of the incident. She stated that she had not observed any signs of aggression in her daughter, but did notice increased anxiety and insomnia in the days prior. This account further strengthened the defense's claims about Silvana's fragile mental state. By the close of the pretrial phase, prosecutors had compiled a full body of evidence, including expert evaluations, witness interviews, surveillance footage, and medical reports. The court scheduled the first official hearing, emphasizing the need for a comprehensive review of both legal and medical aspects. The case marked the beginning of a trial that would not only determine the future of one woman, but could also set a precedent for how similar cases are handled in Colombia's justice system. The first hearing in the case of Silvana Torres took place in early September 2025 at the district court in Manizales. The courtroom was filled with journalists, community advocates, and local residents. The judge declared the proceedings open to the public but restricted video recording to avoid putting pressure on participants. Tension filled the room. Every detail sparked public reaction, and any statement made its way into the headlines almost instantly. The prosecution opened with a detailed account of the timeline. Reports from forensic teams, crime scene investigators, and the apartment inspection were read aloud. The prosecutor emphasized that the scene clearly ruled out any third-party involvement and pointed to a single individual. As evidence, they presented fingerprints on the knife handle and blood traces that matched the DNA of both the mother and her daughter. Investigators argued that Silvana acted with awareness and that her attempt at self-harm afterward indicated a desire to avoid accountability. The defense was then given the floor. Silvana's attorney claimed the charges ignored her mental state. He reminded the court that she had been experiencing a depressive episode, had not received adequate medical care, and was emotionally exhausted. According to him, her actions were not driven by malice, but were the result of a breakdown caused by severe psychological instability. The court heard testimony from Silvana's mother, who gave a detailed account of the morning of the tragedy, leaving the house, the call from neighbors, the arrival of emergency services, and the moment the door was forced open. Her version aligned with the investigation, but also emotionally supported the defense's claim, emphasizing that there had been no prior signs of aggression. She spoke calmly, avoiding speculation, though her confusion was evident. Neighbors followed, confirming that they had heard a brief cry and a thud before silence fell. No one reported seeing strangers in the building that day. One witness mentioned that Silvana had appeared withdrawn in recent weeks and rarely left her apartment. These statements contributed to the picture of her emotional isolation and mental decline. The prosecution presented the findings from the court-appointed psychiatric evaluation, which concluded that Silvana might have been partially aware of her actions at the time. Experts noted signs of emotional shock and disorientation, but ultimately found that she could still comprehend the nature of what occurred. This finding became a central argument for the prosecution, ruling out legal insanity. At the next session, medical professionals from the hospital where Silvana had been treated testified. They stated that upon arrival, she was in shock, with low blood pressure and superficial cuts. Her behavior was described as apathetic but not erratic. They emphasized that she cooperated with the staff and showed no signs of aggression. The defense attorney requested an additional independent evaluation, citing contradictions between existing medical reports. The court granted the motion and ordered a new examination to be conducted in Bogotá. This temporarily delayed the proceedings, frustrating many who were expecting a swift resolution. During the recess, media coverage intensified. Photos from the courtroom and speculative commentary about Silvana's demeanor flooded social media. Some outlets portrayed her as expressionless, while others noted signs of remorse. The defense condemned these reports as damaging to the presumption of innocence and warned that public opinion could influence the outcome. When the hearings resumed, the newly appointed experts confirmed that Silvana had been experiencing a depressive state, though they clarified that this did not eliminate responsibility. The judge accepted the findings and emphasized the need for an objective and balanced assessment. The prosecutor reiterated that personal conflicts and psychological stress may have been motivating factors, while the defense maintained there was no evidence of intentional harm. By the end of the month, the case entered its final phase of witness questioning. Representatives from Family Protection Services testified that the household had never been flagged as high risk. This raised questions about the prosecution's claim of premeditation. The court then moved to closing arguments, where both sides would present their final positions and lay the groundwork for the upcoming verdict. After the main court hearings concluded, national authorities stepped in to review the handling of the investigation. The Ministry of Justice submitted a formal request to the Caldas Department Prosecutor's Office, demanding the full case file. The goal was to rule out procedural errors and ensure transparency in a case that had drawn nationwide attention. The Federal Bureau of Judicial Investigations assigned its own experts to reanalyze the case. They reviewed crime scene photos, forensic reports, medical documents, and witness testimonies. Multiple meetings were held involving investigators, prosecutors, and court-appointed psychologists. The findings confirmed the overall integrity of the case, though some discrepancies in the timeline were identified. For example, the time emergency services were contacted didn't fully align with witness statements, prompting a further review of dispatch center call logs. Special attention was given to the handling of physical evidence. An independent team verified that storage protocols had been followed properly. However, it was recommended that internal oversight be strengthened to prevent data leaks. During the review, it was discovered that certain documents had reached the media before their official release, breaching confidentiality. As a result, the prosecutor's office launched an internal audit of staff who had access to the case materials. Federal authorities also examined the psychological aspects of the tragedy. The Ministry of Health requested copies of psychiatric evaluations to include in a national report on family-related offenses connected to emotional disorders. The report emphasized that the lack of structured support for mothers in crisis situations contributes to the rise in such incidents. This analysis added depth to the public discourse, expanding the case's context beyond the city of Manizales. As part of the federal review, a group of investigators was sent to the city to re-interview several witnesses. Their testimonies were cross-checked against surveillance footage and phone records. No new individuals were identified in connection with the incident, and the evidence reaffirmed the original theory that only one person had been involved. Still, experts recommended a follow-up psychiatric evaluation, citing potential subjectivity in the initial findings. Following a directive from the Attorney General's office, a joint investigative commission was formed. It included representatives from a psychiatric institute, a forensic center, and the Department of Social Protection. This team evaluated not only the incident itself, but also the circumstances leading up to it, such as the family's financial situation, medical history, and any contact with social services. The review revealed that Silvana had reached out for help in the months prior, but due to bureaucratic delays, she did not receive adequate support. These findings were compiled into an internal report highlighting gaps in the family support system. The commission noted that the failure to respond quickly may have indirectly contributed to the deterioration of the situation. The report was forwarded to the Ministry of Family and Social Integration, along with recommendations to revise eligibility criteria for psychological and financial assistance. Federal agencies also monitored Silvana's safety while in custody. Reports of potential threats led to increased security measures at the detention facility. She remained under medical supervision and received ongoing therapy. Prosecutors emphasized that ensuring the physical safety of a defendant is a fundamental responsibility of the state, regardless of public sentiment. Simultaneously, an audit was conducted on the local police response. Authorities reviewed how quickly officers arrived and how initial documentation was handled. While no signs of negligence were found, the commission recommended further training for handling family-related cases involving emotional distress or aggressive behavior. By the end of the federal review, officials confirmed that the procedural conduct of the investigation had been lawful and the findings reliable. However, the final report included clear recommendations to improve coordination among law enforcement, healthcare providers, and social agencies. The case of Silvana Torres became a turning point in discussions about institutional oversight, showing that the tragedy in Manizales was not just a personal crisis, but a warning about deeper systemic failures that demand reform. After several months of investigation and multiple court sessions, the Manizales court moved toward delivering its verdict. The hearing took place in late November 2025 under heightened security. Members of the press, human rights observers, and relatives of the young girl were present. The judge reminded everyone that the review was complete, both sides had the opportunity to present evidence, and it was time for a legal assessment of the case. In its closing statement, the prosecution insisted that Silvana Torres be found guilty of committing a deliberate crime. According to the prosecution, the evidence left no doubt that she acted consciously and with intent. They cited forensic findings confirming that the wounds were inflicted precisely and without any signs of struggle. The prosecutor argued that the act of self-harm afterward should not be seen as remorse, but rather as an attempt to avoid responsibility. The defense once again focused on Silvana's mental state. Her attorney emphasized that expert reports recorded an emotional breakdown caused by chronic stress and isolation. According to him, Silvana had no intention of committing a crime and acted in a state of partial loss of control. He asked the court to recognize the temporary psychological disorder as a mitigating factor and to assign medical treatment instead of a lengthy prison sentence. The judge then gave Silvana the opportunity to speak. She spoke quietly, stating that she could not remember the details of what happened. She expressed regret and asked the family for forgiveness. Her emotional state remained unstable, but the court was focused on legal facts rather than feelings. After a short recess, the judge began reading the verdict. The decision stated that the defendant's guilt was proven by the combined evidence, forensic reports, witness testimonies, and medical results. The court confirmed that Silvana Torres caused the injuries that led to her daughter's death and acted without involvement from anyone else. It also acknowledged that she was experiencing signs of psychological distress at the time, but these signs did not eliminate her understanding of the consequences of her actions. Taking all factors into account, the court classified her actions as a deliberate crime committed under mitigating circumstances. The sentence imposed was 15 years of imprisonment, with a possible review after 7 years if she successfully completed psychiatric treatment and received positive evaluations from medical professionals. The court also ordered that she be placed in a specialized facility where she would receive medical supervision and therapeutic support. After the verdict was read, the courtroom fell silent. The girl's relatives considered the decision fair, though some observers questioned whether the sentence was too lenient. Prosecutors stated they were satisfied, noting that the court considered all the evidence. The defense attorney announced he would not file an appeal, calling the ruling a balanced approach between punishment and compassion. Public reaction to the verdict was divided. Some believed the sentence was too short, while others saw it as a step toward recognizing mental health as a key factor in criminal cases. Social media discussions focused on the need to reform systems that support parents in crisis. Psychologists and legal experts use this case to highlight how the lack of timely assistance can lead to tragic consequences. The Ministry of Justice released a statement noting that the court's decision would serve as the basis for developing rehabilitation programs for women suffering from postpartum and stress-related disorders. Around the same time, Parliament began discussing the creation of a national support center for mothers in crisis. By the end of the year, Silvana was transferred to a medical-type correctional facility. There, she began therapy and regular psychological consultations. For the public, the trial was over, but its consequences continued to influence policy and societal views on family-related crimes. The court's decision marked the end of the investigation, but the beginning of a broader conversation about how the state must work to prevent similar tragedies in the future. After the verdict was delivered, the case of Silvana Torres did not fade from public view. On the contrary, it became a catalyst for nationwide conversations that extended beyond the courtroom into Colombia's broader social and policy landscape. Media outlets continued to cover the aftermath, focusing on how government agencies were responding to the findings that emerged during the investigation. Universities, advocacy groups, and medical institutions launched discussions about the urgent need to reform mental health care and family support systems. Psychologists and sociologists highlighted that the tragedy exposed significant weaknesses in the country's safety nets. According to the Ministry of Health, the number of women seeking psychological help in the postpartum period nearly doubled in the 2 months following the court decision. In some regions, pilot crisis centers were launched to offer mothers free counseling and temporary housing in safe environments. Grassroots initiatives focused resources on prevention, specifically early detection of depression and emotional burnout. Human rights organizations use the case to advocate for a shift in how society perceives mental health conditions. Many argue that the initial public reaction to Silvana Torres was driven more by emotion and rigid views about motherhood than by facts. Media coverage began to explore the stigma women face when going through psychological crises. Mental health professionals noted that such judgment often discourages people from seeking help in time, sometimes with devastating consequences. The Ministry of Family and Social Integration announced the creation of a dedicated commission tasked with studying preventative frameworks. Its mission was to design a national strategy to reduce family-related aggression and offer psychological assistance to parents. A key section of the proposed plan addressed improving coordination between social workers, medical institutions, and schools. These societal debates also triggered legal discussions. Colombia's Supreme Court began working on amendments to clarify how temporary mental health episodes might be considered as mitigating circumstances in legal cases. Legal experts pointed out that the Torres case underscored the need to better define legal standards around mental capacity, aiming to eliminate contradictions between clinical and judicial interpretations. Meanwhile, local authorities took action. The city government of Manizales introduced the Family Balance Initiative, which focused on identifying households in crisis. Under this program, social workers teamed up with police and mental health professionals to conduct home visits, offering on-the-spot support to families showing signs of emotional distress. Early reports showed that the initiative helped prevent several potential domestic incidents. Public perception of Silvana Torres evolved over time. While in the early weeks her name was closely associated with the crime, later narratives began to center on whether the tragedy could have been prevented by a more responsive state system. Documentaries and opinion pieces reframed the case as a breakdown in institutional support, a young mother left alone to face overwhelming challenges. This shift helped promote a more balanced perspective on similar cases in the future. Medical institutions also began developing training programs for general practitioners to help them recognize early signs of postpartum and stress-related disorders. The Ministry of Health incorporated this into the National Preventive Care Agenda. By year's end, a regional database had been created to track risk factors contributing to family crises. Despite these government efforts, public interest in the case remained strong. Journalists continued to report on Silvana's condition as she remained under medical supervision at a correctional facility. According to doctors, she was undergoing therapy, showing emotional improvement, and participating in rehabilitation programs. However, public opinion remained split. caught between sympathy and condemnation. The Torres case became a symbol of change, prompting society to reevaluate what responsibility means and what role the state should play in preventing domestic crises. What started as a reaction to a single courtroom decision grew into a national dialogue about mental health, accountability, and the importance of recognizing tragedies not just as crimes, but also as warnings. After the conclusion of the trial in late 2025, Silvana Torres' story entered a new phase, one centered around the enforcement of the sentence and ongoing medical supervision. She was transferred to a specialized unit within a correctional facility in the Caldas department, where secure confinement was combined with a structured mental health rehabilitation program. Medical professionals reported gradual emotional stabilization, a decrease in anxiety symptoms, and a growing willingness to participate in therapeutic activities. Monthly reports from a psychiatric commission were submitted to the Ministry of Justice, tracking her progress and evaluating the effectiveness of the treatment. The facility's administration allowed Silvana to take part in social reintegration courses and work therapy. She contributed to a clothing production workshop, assisted in the library, and enrolled in an adult education program. These efforts were part of a nationwide initiative to reduce the risk of repeat offenses among women convicted of crimes linked to emotional breakdowns. According to the facility's records, she had no disciplinary violations, an important factor in her interim evaluations. At the same time, the prosecutor's office published a final analytical report on the case. It confirmed that all investigative actions had followed legal procedures, no violations were found, and the expert conclusions were deemed valid. However, the report included recommendations for social services and public health authorities, strengthen family crisis prevention measures, and improve cross-agency coordination for early detection of emotional instability among parents. Based on these findings, the Ministry of Family Affairs initiated the development of a national support system for women at psychological and emotional risk. The proposal aimed to establish a network of regional centers offering legal and psychological assistance. A bill derived from the investigation's conclusions was under review in Parliament as part of broader social policy reforms. The supporting documentation emphasized that the Torres case highlighted the need to address internal crises not only through criminal proceedings but also through early prevention. International observers included the case in their annual review of judicial practices across Latin America, noting that it marked the first time in Colombia that mandatory psychiatric treatment was incorporated into a sentencing framework. This was viewed as a precedent-setting approach, one that reflected a changing attitude toward mental health within the legal system. Human rights groups praised the court's decision as an example of balancing accountability with compassion, suggesting it set a new standard for evaluating emotionally driven crimes. Meanwhile, programs launched in Manizales in response to the tragedy continued to expand. The city's local government extended its network of mental health support centers, offering counseling to families facing high-stress situations. According to local officials, consultations increased by over 40% in 6 months, a sign of growing public trust in available resources. Schools and universities held workshops emphasizing the importance of seeking help at the first signs of emotional distress. Journalists continued to follow Silvana's case. Periodic updates in the media detailed her condition and participation in rehabilitation programs. Medical staff reported that she showed steady progress, complied with facility rules, and actively engaged with therapeutic staff. Her attorney submitted a petition to review her confinement conditions after the 7-year mark, citing her clinical improvements and model behavior. A decision is expected following a new psychiatric evaluation. By this point, public perception of the case had evolved. What was once seen solely as a criminal act gradually became a symbol of the urgent need for systemic support for parents in crisis. Silvana Torres' story was incorporated into training materials for future doctors, attorneys, and social workers as a case study of how legal frameworks and mental health care intersect. For the Colombian state, the case served not only as a legal precedent but as a driving force for reform, illustrating that preventing tragedies requires not just punishment, but empathy and timely intervention.